welcome to Up in the Blue Seats, our New York Rangers podcast from the New York Post. Jake Brown here alongside guest co-host for the week. You hear him almost every week here on the show. It's the great Larry Brooks. Follow him on Twitter at NYP_Brooksy. And we will be joined later in the program in just a few minutes by a huge Ranger fan and friend of the program. ESPN's own Linda Cohn will join us. Larry, it's nice to not blow a third period lead and actually come back from one on come back from a deficit on Monday night against the Blues in a game. It feels like every week we're like, all right, this is a must-win game. This is a must-win game. Felt like a must-win game before things spiraled out of control in a game where we saw 6 different players score a goal for the Rangers.
It was as must-win as you can get the first week of December. You can't lose. Listen, you can't lose back-to-back nights at home to Ottawa and Chicago, but you certainly can't lose 3 and 4 nights when the third one is St. Louis, a Blues team playing as poorly as anybody in the league. And look, this is probably not the time to dissect a victory because the 2 points were essential and you just move on. But they didn't play well Monday night either. And for me, that's the problem. It's not simply that they've only won 12 games. It's not that, they're right now, a couple of points out of the playoffs. It's that they really haven't established anything at all through almost a third of the season now, 27 games, essentially a third of the season. And they just haven't established anything. They don't play well. They're not authoritative. Not sure what they are. And I think that's more concerning than the record or the standings, is that at some point that, you need to stake a claim. Who are you? How are you going to play? What's your strength? And right now, the strengths we anticipated coming in, goaltending, power play, haven't been strengths. Go back to the narratives leading into the season. What were the Rangers going to need? They're going to need Shesterkin to replicate last season. Hasn't happened. They're going to need the kids to step up and fill those top 6 holes that were left by Vetrano and Kopp. Hasn't happened. They're going to need Trocheck to be able to replicate some of the dynamic with Panarin that Strome had. Hasn't happened. So they're flailing. They're trying to find who they are. They're trying to find their game, and it's taken a long time. Now, time is not up. There's no question. Time is not up. 2/3 of the season lays ahead, but the next 4 games are against Vegas, Colorado, New Jersey, and Toronto. They're going to have to elevate their play to a point where they haven't been at all this year, more than a game or so. So they have a lot of work to do, but this was a major sigh of relief coming out of Monday night's game. Another loss on Monday would have been, I think, debilitating.
Yeah, we're going to learn a lot about this team going to Vegas, going to Colorado, and the Devils coming here on Monday as a couple of the best teams in hockey and the defending Stanley Cup champions as well. You had a funny Twitter exchange yesterday that I want to react to because maybe we need more of this from you, and maybe you'll get the Rangers going. You said 3rd offensive zone penalty in the last 6 games for Lafreniere, but by all means, let's bump him up to play with Zibanejad. And then quickly he scores, and he said, so I look at this as kind of a math exam where you don't give the right answer, but have to show the work that leads up to it. Turns out to be the right move, but I'm not convinced for the right reason. Regardless, critical victory, and of course, 13-93-24 should get a long look.
Well, yeah, it was. Listen, I haven't really. I think Gerard Gallant has been somewhat passive through the last week, and it kind of surprised me. I don't think of him as an especially passive personality. Lafreniere took a very damaging penalty against Edmonton in the 3rd period in the offensive zone. He took a damaging penalty in the 3rd period the next game against the Devils in the offensive zone. And then last night, I just thought to myself, and I don't particularly think Lafreniere's been playing well, And so I thought, this is the time to sit him. And instead, he was rewarded with a promotion. Now, listen, getting Lafreniere up with Zibanejad has been something I think that, that Gallant should have looked at for a while, and moving Kakko up on the right side, twinning them up with him is something I think that's, something they could have looked at for a while now. But I just thought this was kind of, it was incongruous to do it at that point. Well, of course, they're, on their first couple are, they make the move late in the second period, and then in the third they score on their first two shifts. Lafreniere getting one on a tip. It was the game winner, actually. So it was the right move, but I'm not sure for the for the right reason. But what was funny was, I don't usually do a lot of in-game tweeting. I just don't. I'm not a person who responds to a lot of stuff. But I thought, this is just something it's more of a concept than a play. So I'll just throw that out there. And I'm not a big person for monitoring, retweets and likes, and I'm not even sure what a ratio is. I know it's bad, but I'm not, I had someone explain it to me once and I forgot the definition, but that's okay. But I noticed that there were, a lot of responses to the tweet. And so someone actually texted me and said, hey, you should probably take a look at this. And I went, and after the goals were scored, I was, of course, being belittled, ridiculed. But the funny part about it was that at the start, this tweet was getting multiple likes, which I assumed that meant that people were agreeing with me. But by the it's kind of like maybe the early balloting was going in my favor, but when the polls opened, it went against me. But hey, listen, that's fine. I mean, I'm glad that people are engaged. I'm glad for the Rangers that it worked out. I think now it's important that the line be allowed to breathe and go through, and play together for a while and not get yanked apart if it doesn't look good in the first game or two. The one point I'll make, though, and I make this in a column I've written for tomorrow for Wednesday's paper, is that the imbalance of ice time will not be addressed by playing Kakko and Lafreniere 5-on-5 with Zibanejad. The imbalance of ice time, the comparatively small ice time that Lafreniere and Kakko get, don't have anything to do with 5-on-5. They actually each have more 5-on-5 ice time than Zibanejad and Kreider. But where the ice time issue comes into play on specialty teams, because the first power play unit chews up almost all of the power play time, and neither Lafreniere nor Kakko are on penalty kill. So they're going to get they're going to be put into, I think, a better position playing with Zibanejad 5-on-5. I think that can only enhance their games. I think it can only enhance their growth. But you're still going to run into the same situation where they may be sitting for minutes and minutes at a time if the allotment of time on the power play and penalty kill continues. If that first unit continues to be out there for a minute 35, a minute 40, a power play, it doesn't matter. If neither gets onto the penalty kill, it really doesn't matter. So if the object, and I'm not quite sure it is, if the object is to give Lafreniere and Kakko more ice time, then the first power play unit either has to be changed, the personnel needs to change to include one of those two, or there needs to be a more even split between the first and second units.
Did you ever think about being a coach, an assistant coach? No, never.
No.
All right. Well, You could do a little coaching, Larry. Well, you said ratio. I've seen worse ratios on Twitter. Yours had 43 quote tweets, 12 retweets. A true ratio is like when you have 3 retweets and like 347 quote tweets. That's when you
Oh, okay.
truly get ratioed. So yours isn't
Okay.
in the Hall of Fame. There's some Hall of Famers out there. The Hall of Famers are 0 retweets and like 4,000 quote tweets. That's when
Okay.
someone said something so wrong that they should probably delete their account. So you didn't hit that mark. So you're in good hands. How about Keandre Miller, though? First goal of the year. The guy's a restricted free agent. He's talked with Molly about, he's want to score some more points. He wants to put it in the back of the net. I feel like that's a sigh of relief finally for this guy to put one in the back of the net. And now the psyche hopefully improves from there.
Yeah, I think so. If that's been weighing on him, and that's certainly the takeaway from his conversation with Molly, then this should prove beneficial for him. The last thing you want is for any player to obsess over points, to obsess over goals, and certainly for a defenseman, and certainly for a young player, and certainly for a young defenseman, and certainly for a young defenseman who's on a contract year. So you'd like. Keandre Miller has so many gifts, and he has worked so hard to get to the point where he was entering the season, seemingly on the precipice of, or springboard to considerable success in what is still only his 3rd year in the NHL, his 3rd year as a pro, and his 6th or 7th year as a defenseman. He converted from forward at the age of 16, I think. And so, you just don't want Keandre to obsess over, I have to get this many goals, I have to get this many points, because the way he plays, if he's playing well, points will come. If he's playing well, he'll score. It's kind of like you don't put the result before the process. You don't put the point totals before the process of playing. So I also think that the Miller Trouba pair that was so good the second half of last year has been impacted by Trouba's injury, has been impacted by Jacob not playing nearly as well as he did last year. So I think they're both struggling. I think it was a smart move to separate them for, what was it, 2 or 3 games, I think. And I think it's the right move to get them back together, because the Rangers aren't going anywhere if their top 4 isn't Lindgren, Fox, Miller, Trouba. It's just not going to work. But I think it was a smart move to split Trouba and Miller up for a handful of games to kind of let them catch their breath a little bit, change the look a little bit. And I think maybe now that Keandre has the first one, it'll be a little bit more organic for him, and he will settle down and be a little bit more reliable on both sides of the puck.
Well, the Rangers are doing all they can to make some changes, because right now they're on the outside looking in, and we'll learn a lot about this team this next week. Vegas, Colorado Devils, before the next episode of Up in the Blue Seats comes next week. But coming up next on the show is a friend of the program, lifelong Ranger fan, and ESPN legend, Linda Cohn, will join me and Larry next. Joining Larry Brooks and I now and Up in the Blue Seats is a friend of the program and a friend of the Rangers. She is a rabid New York Rangers fan, a New Yorker, of course, fan of all New York teams, including our New York Mets, who just signed Justin Verlander. Woo-hoo! You've seen her on your TV screen on ESPN for the past 3 decades, 30 years, hosting SportsCenter, where I'm pretty sure she has hosted more SportsCenters than anyone ever in the history of mankind, in the Guinness Book of World Record for hosting SportsCenter. You can catch her on ESPN as well, doing NHL games. She's an on-ice reporter, and of course, you can watch her on In the Crease on ESPN Plus. Let's welcome in Linda Cohn. Linda, welcome to the show.
Always great to be with you guys. Larry, how are you? Good to see you. 3,000 miles away. Of course, 5 years ago, almost, I moved to Los Angeles, but yeah, I still love the Rangers, still follow them religiously. And of course, still follow the entire NHL and everything else. And I don't love all New York teams. Remember that, Jake. Just because
Not
I
the
was born in
Yankees.
Manhattan, raised on Long Island, it does not mean I love and root for all New York teams. Let's be clear. New York sports fans, I frown upon New York sports fans who root for every team in New York. Unheard of.
Yeah. Well, I'm Jets. I root for the Giants to do well. I hate the Yankees, Mets, and I'm Knicks. And like if the Nets do well, that's fine. I'm not a Nets hater. So
Right.
I'm with you there. Do you have a tally of like I know you have the most Sports Center ever. Like, do you have like a long board? Is it like at 4,000? What's the number at? Do you have a range?
I don't know. I just know back in whenever it was when they had that, I think it was 2016 when the powers to be figured out. I hosted more sports centers than any man or woman at ESPN, and that was really cool. They had some famous sports celebrities on that I love, including at that time. It was all a surprise. Like David Tyree came on the show. It was all like, hey, let's celebrate Linda, and all this kind of stuff. And then Zach Wheeler, who was a Met then, he came on the show, and Mark Messier, of course, he was on the show. It was really a fun time. My kids surprised me. It was really very cool. So I think I bet you others are catching up a bit now, but who knows who keeps the tally going, Jake? I don't know. I just, we take every day at this point of our careers and lives day by day. We're just happy we're still doing it.
No kidding. I think the last time I saw you was at the hotel bar in Stockholm when the Rangers were there 10 years ago.
Oh my God. I'm sure that's crazy, Larry.
I think it might be.
I don't know how
honestly, I think it might be.
I remember that. That was an amazing trip. That was wow, that was 10 years. Yeah. This is the only time I've ever been to Sweden or Stockholm. I only went because the Rangers were playing 2 games there. And one of my friends, Fran Rotella, who worked for ESPN at the time, she's a Ranger fan. We were just like we were there like late at night, waiting to do the late Sports Center. She was a coordinating producer, and we were talking about it. And then she started like going on kayak and seeing how much it costs to fly the round trip to Sweden. And she's like, Linda, you're not going to believe this. It's only like $640 round trip. I go, we got to go. And that was how it is. And 5 days we stayed there and we saw 2 Ranger games. And I think Derek Stepan, who was a Ranger at the time, was so shocked when I was walking into the hotel as they were getting off the bus. Larry, like, Linda, what are you doing here? I mean, I went there as a fan. Yeah, you went there to work, Larry.
Yeah, it was a good trip. It was a fun trip. So the Rangers have been fortunate to have a string of franchise goaltenders.
Yeah.
It looks like they've got another one now. So who are you? Are you a Mike Richter person, or are you a Henrik Lundqvist person?
Well, I'm dating myself, but thanks to my dad, that's how I became a Rangers fan, even though I grew up on Long Island. It was the Rangers at the time when I was, younger, that they were in the playoffs and the Islanders weren't. That was in the early stages of the Islanders' existence when they weren't, before the 4 straight Stanley Cups, of course. So I became a Ranger fan. And at that time, and I'm dating myself and I don't care, I loved Eddie Jockman. I mean,
you know what? I was going to.
He's my guy.
I was going to ask you if you were a Jockman, but I wasn't sure if you came just a little bit after that.
Yeah, he was the reason why I fell in love with the Rangers and being a goaltender, and that's what I became because of Eddie. We all know, of course, the story and the awful exit, how the Rangers sold him for $30,000 and he came back in a Detroit uniform the next day. I mean, sports was so weird back then, right, Larry? I mean, it was before Jake's time, and then the whole MSG was chanting Eddie's name and rooting for the Red Wings, as was I from my living room couch with my dad. Back in 1975. But what reason why I loved Eddie Jockman, it was that awful series, that playoff series against the Islanders that started the whole Islander run of being, oh my God, they're respectable. When they beat the Rangers, as we all know, in the opening round, when it was best of 3, and they beat the Rangers, Steve Vickers and company, letting it all happen. But while they were about to lose, for some reason, Gilles Villemure started the 3rd and decisive game, and he stunk. And I never liked Villemure. He was boring, a goalie. He just stood there. And so Eddie Jockman comes in for him, and he starts a fight with Gary Howitt. I don't know if you remember this. I forget plenty of stuff. I remember this. He started a fight to get his team going. Wake up. They were down like 3-0, and it worked. And they tied up the game only to lose, of course, in overtime. JP Parisi, 11 seconds in, and the rest is history. But this is how I fell in love with Eddie Giacomin. He was just an exciting goalie. He really cared. And so we all love Mike Richter. I mean, who doesn't love Mike Richter? He got a Stanley Cup in our lifetime. It's amazing. And if it wasn't for him, they wouldn't have won it. And then, of course, the King, greatness. And I do think we have another one in Igor, but it's a small sample size. We got to see how this plays out. He's taken a step back this year a little bit, but he's got the greatest goalie coach in the world in Benoit Allaire. But it's Eddie Giacomin who got me into hockey, and it was Eddie Giacomin who made me want to be a goaltender.
Yeah, it's interesting. Now, of course, I was in 419 when Eddie came back. I was in 419 for all of those games during those years. People either don't remember or don't know how beloved Giacomin was as a player. This was a team with Gilbert, Rattel, later on Hadfield, Kachuk, Park. I mean, we know them all, but it was Giacomin who was the face of that franchise. He was so popular, honestly. I mean, he was as popular as Lundqvist is now.
Yeah,
I mean, there's no question about it. And he was the guy who kind of was the personification of the Rangers becoming a big time team in the NHL, because when Emil traded for him, they were in the mid 60s. They were missing the playoffs every year. They and the Bruins were fighting for 5th place every year. And Giacomin's first year in New York was a disaster. He was booed off. He was booed off the ice. People were throwing garbage at him at the old Garden, and I mean the old Garden, one between 49th and 50th, on between 7th and 8th. And Cesar Maniago actually replaced him as the #1 goalie for the second half of that first season. But Emil believed in him. He saw what Giacomin had. He brought him back, and once Eddie became the #1 goalie, he became an all-star, first team all-star. He was the defining Ranger of that era. And again, that's with Hall of Famers Gilbert, Rattel, Park on that team. So it's interesting because Richter came and won the cup. Lundqvist did it for 15 years. That Giacomin has receded in history, but he's a monumental figure in Ranger history. He certainly is.
Yeah, I mean, I think he had gray hair when he was 25 years old, right? I mean, he was like the first silver fox. But and then later, obviously, when I started covering the Rangers and being around the team a little bit more, and as was he doing stuff for the team, I got to tell him how much he meant to me and what an impact he made for me. And of course, he lit up. He's such a great human, so genuine, and he got a kick out of that. He couldn't believe it. And true story. He's my all-time favorite.
So do you find that working for ESPN, being identified with one team as a fan is enhances you as an on-air figure, or is that something you don't want to advertise too much? You just want to play it down the middle of the road, or do you think your passion, informs what you do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I always wanted people to know, because I feel my success at SportsCenter and ESPN and why I lasted so long. One of the reasons is because I'm always a fan first. And guess who's watching SportsCenter over the years and the decades?
Yeah,
fans, sports fans. And that's how I always felt I was able to connect with them, even when there weren't a lot of women in this field, because that was my way of saying, listen, I'm one of you. I get it. And so I slowly let it out. And, ESPN and the powers to be there finally woke up and realized, oh, wow, it's a good idea to show off your personality. Oh, really? Great. Thanks. So then, more and more of us were letting that out. And it became, and so many times, my colleagues would do a Ranger highlight, and I wouldn't even be on the show, and they would mention my name. And I didn't mind that. And so it's good. Now, the funny part is, a lot of the Rangers through the years and the different managements, Larry, and you've been through it all, of course, over the years, I don't know if they realize half the time what a big Ranger fan I was, or, how the Rangers even were always mentioned on SportsCenter when I was on, even when they weren't playing. It was kind of funny. So I welcome that. I embrace that, because that was the one way that I connected to the viewers, Larry, is them knowing that I'm a fan. And that goes for the Giants and the Mets. and the Knicks. And I don't hate on the Jets. I was rooting for them. I've been rooting for them. They're not hateable. They're up and coming. So I don't mind that at all, Larry. And I think it's good that people see us the way we really are. And sports fans can pick out a phony, and they know that that's what I am not.
Right.
Did you ever think of like a catchphrase to develop? The late Stuart Scott has his catchphrases. Did you ever have one or think about having one over these years?
Well, the funny part is I kind of make a joke of it because, back in 2008, I wrote this funny look at my journey called a book. It was a book called Conehead, a no holds barred account of breaking into the boys club. And it was just a funny look at my life and how I got to where I was. Made fun of myself throughout the book. And so that one chapter was about when I thought of like, oh, maybe I should figure out this catchphrase. Because I always thought, again, one of the reasons why I was connecting to fans is just being myself. Like I didn't have insert catchphrase here type of thing when I did a highlight. I was just reacting to the highlight, what a player is doing, what a coach's body language says. And then I would make a comment. It would be all organic. And I kind of like, that's not for me to have something that I have to say every show. But then I felt, why not? So funny story, I was playing a celebrity softball game in North Carolina, and one of my friends was telling me about her softball team at where she lived, and the name of her team was called Master Batters. And I'm like, Master Batters? She goes, get it? We're the Master Batters, right? And I'm like, oh, that's kind of funny. And then I go, so then on a Sports Center one day, I think it was way back when, it was probably 15 years ago, Mike Piazza, still with the Mets, was up, and, I said, I'm going to use that when a guy hits a home run. I'll say, Mike Piazza, Master Batter, and boom. And everyone got a big, chuckle out of it. Next thing I know, the next day, one of my bosses calls me into his office, and it was like, gave me that look of kind of laughing. He's like, what are you doing, Linda? Whatever you're saying or doing, please, don't do that ever again. And so I didn't do it ever again. So, I get it. I applaud those who have catchphrases. But it was never, ever, really ever for me. But I kind of got sucked into it for a little bit.
You interviewed Jacob Trouba, who on your former podcast, who's now the Ranger captain.
Yeah, love
him. He's been throwing some punches lately. He's not afraid to use his hands.
You got to wake up the team. Decades ago, Eddie Jockerman did it. No, I love Jacob Trouba. Maybe I'm a little biased. I just think, I'm not even in the room, but I know what a leader he is. I know what the game means to him. Larry could speak to that. He spoke to millions of times. All he does is want to win. All he wants to do is lead, and he leads by example. And I love it. I mean, he's got a little of that Tom Brady in him, where he lets it out, and that's how he lets it out. He's a hockey player, so he drops his gloves. I don't want him to fight every night or every game. That doesn't, because here's the thing I worry about. And it was, listen, they beat St. Louis, who was awful, but a win's a win. But before that game, I was like, here's the thing about Jacob Trouba. If it's not resonating with his teammates that he's dropping the gloves and fighting to get them going, and they're not going, and it's not translating into wins, then maybe it's like a coach whose message isn't resonating with his players. And that was beginning to worry me, right? Because Jacob Trouba would drop the gloves and it would still be a loss at the end of the night. And so I was like, maybe there's a plan B here. So I'm glad they beat St. Louis. Baby steps, obviously a mix-up of lines, shaking up the lines. Good job by the head coach. I never panic with his team, but Ranger fans shouldn't panic. I know a lot of us wanted Chris Kreider, thought he would be the perfect captain. But, there was a reason. I don't know what it is, but I'm all in always for Jacob Trouba.
Well, Jacob, to me, it's interesting having covered this team through the pandemic, where for 2 solid years, there was no personal interaction between reporters and the players, at least the print reporters and the players. So Trouba's first year he came, and that was, the year leading into the pandemic. So I got, you got to know him a little bit, but he was not comfortable in New York at all his first year. And he talked about how it was a very, very difficult adjustment for him. From Winnipeg to New York, from the only organization for which he'd played to another one, from one system to another, from one defense partner to another. And he talked about that. So it was kind of hard to get a read on him as a guy. But my impression of him, that he was kind of a goofy guy off the ice. If you spoke to him, you wouldn't necessarily think this was a professional athlete.
Yeah.
Certainly
well, a lot of those,
and not a hockey player who was going to drop his gloves.
Yeah.
He just has a very different personality.
He's got like an Ed Sheeran look to him,
Yeah.
You look at Ed Sheeran, you're like, I can't believe he writes and sings these romantic songs.
No, right. So, so you go through then 2 years with just talking on Zoom and talking in formal press conferences. And then, this year I get back in and he's so much more comfortable, at least dealing with the media in New York.
Yeah.
And he's open and he's welcoming and, he's, I think, as candid as generally, a player can be. But I remember, because again, I had described him as kind of a goofy guy. And I was asking him early in the season about Braden Schneider.
Yeah.
And he said, well, yeah, he kind of reminds him. He said, that Schneider kind of reminded him of himself when he was young. He said, this goofy guy. I thought, yeah, that's it. This goofy guy.
Use your words. That's funny.
But,
that's funny. That's funny.
So, I like Jacob as a guy a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I got the same when I interviewed him last year, same kind of thing when he was on the podcast talking about, he was very open. He says, like, my wife and I, we didn't go out. We were, again, COVID issues, but we didn't have a chance to get acclimated or accustomed or find out if we really liked New York. So it took him a while. And then he was so happy when finally everything was lifted and he and his wife were going to restaurants and going to shows and doing all the fun things. And that was really, that transformed him finally. That was a big part of it. But listen, not many people can make an adjustment to come to New York, period, let alone come from Winnipeg to New York. Right. So I always love the whole story with Jacob Trouba that, his wife, since his wife's a doctor and all this, and he made the move for his wife. And I was like, oh my God, what a prince.
Yeah, that's a hell of a line. Wow. Linda, you seem to be in the minority of the non-panicking Ranger fans right now, because everyone's ready to jump off the Empire State Building. Igor hasn't been the same player. We didn't expect him to be as good as he was last year, but it's been a rocky ride so far. Some third period blown leads. Why aren't you panicking yet?
I know most Ranger fans panic. Listen, it's New York. Most Met fans panic. Met fans forget panic. They're already doom and gloom from the get-go. But Ranger fans, just hold on, man. It's not even Christmas yet. They're on the outside looking in of a playoff spot. Yeah, I get that. Okay, is Igor Shesterkin going to get any worse? No, he's not. He's going to get any better. Should he stop letting up 2 bad goals a game? Yeah, he probably should. But he will. He's got the best goalie coach in the world in Benoit Allaire. They will fix it. Remember how Ranger fans were panicking against the Pittsburgh Penguins and how Igor Shesterkin wasn't looking good in the playoffs? Remember all that? Oh, and what happened? Oh, everything turned out fine, didn't it? It's going to be fine. Am I not saying that the Eastern Conference isn't going to be competitive? And it is, and other teams that we didn't expect to be good are good. Yes, the Detroits, the Buffaloes, teams like that. That are, like kind of thing. And there's always a Penguins and all these other teams. We all know who they are. But it's not the month of March. I'm not panicking yet. It's not Christmas yet. Ranger fans, don't worry about it. There's too much talent there. Do they have to figure out how to score more 5-on-5? Yes. Am I not shocked? I'm not shocked that Capo Caco isn't a difference maker. I thought he was a goner in the offseason, honestly. I'm just not a huge fan of his talents. Philip Hedl won me over a little bit in the postseason, but he gets hurt a lot. I love Alexei Lafreniere. Love what he brings. Love all his game. He's got a lot in that toolbox, but the other guys don't. Hedl and Caco, I'm still like, meh. So there's not a lot of depth there. I love the signing of Vinny Trocheck. He was always been one of my favorites. Yeah, the term was a little long, but we're not paying it. But he's contributed. He's having a great year. Nobody panic. What do you expect, Kreider to score 52 again? It's not going to happen. But Mika's doing his thing. And Panarin has multi-point games every game. So it's going to be fine. It'll be fine. Halak, I thought would be better. At least the last couple of outings, he's looked like the Yara Halak that used to frustrate Ranger fans. So hopefully he'll get a little better. But if I'm talking about the backup goalie, forget it's like, who cares? It's about Igor. So everything went right last year. So we just got to kind of take a breath and see how this plays out. But it's December, not March.
So Linda, who would you say you've done your most memorable hockey interview with?
Oh God, I don't know. Even though my fun and the All-Star game last year, I really enjoyed talking with Austin Matthews. He gave me a lot of alone time. It was great. I mean, he's just so real and down to earth and just a cool dude. Really enjoyed talking with him. He really was pretty open. My goal when I sat down with Connor McDavid was to make him laugh. I did make him smile during an interview when I brought up his buddy Leon Draisaitl, and I said something funny regarding him and his personality. But you know how it goes. I mean, every conversation I've had back in the day with Henrik Lundqvist was so memorable. Him and his stall. Always Larry. I mean, he was just such a class guy, still is obviously, but taking the questions when he played his heart out and nobody could score like more than 2 goals, and he'd lose 2-1. And he'd stop 38 shots and they would lose, 1-0. And he would all those are memorable to me. All those but hockey players are the best, Larry. Yeah. They're the best.
You know what I was blessed with covering, starting with Chico Resch.
Yeah,
and then going to Martin Brodeur, Mike Richter, Henrik Lundqvist. You could not have, and certainly the last 3, Richter, Brodeur, and Lundqvist, such elite goaltenders, such elite professional athletes. You could not have had more media-friendly people than those 3. They would talk to you forever. They would sit there and morning skates, they would talk.
Yeah.
Practices, they would talk. After games, they understood it was their responsibility to talk. But if you in an era now where it becomes more and more closed off, players have their own platforms. They certainly don't need local outlets as much as they used to, if they ever did. The line from Brodeur, Richter, Lundqvist is just remarkable. I mean, I was spoiled, and I was spoiled by covering guys like Mike Bossy, covering a guy like Wayne Gretzky, his final 3 years. And, it's so there are some special guys, and it becomes more and more difficult to form those relationships now. I mean, you're not with the team every day. But it's not only COVID, it's that the dynamic is so different. When I started, teams flew commercial. So you traveled with them. You were a traveling party. Now, of course, teams charter out right after games 95% of the time. So they're doing their workouts. They're on their charter. There's very little interaction between reporters and players now, except for the 5 or 10 minutes after a game or after a practice. So you don't have a lot of time to get to know people. So that's been lost. It's a regret of mine. I'm sure it's not a regret of the players, but there is something lost in the translation.
Yeah, since I've been covering the sport nationally for ESPN, when the ESPN getting the sport back, I've had a little more access on a national basis, but I'll give you 2 ends of the earth kind of situations. A few weeks ago, I think it was last month, I was covering a Wild Kings game, Minnesota Wild, but the Kings practice in El Segundo, and the Wild were morning skating at Crypto, right? So I couldn't be at 2 places at once. So I was with the Kings, but the Wild PR people were so nice enough to put the 3 players that I wanted to talk to I can talk to them on the phone, right? Just to get some information. And it was just so wonderful to talk to these kids, like the young guys. This kid Mason Shaw on the Wild. Their stories of comeback and thinking they were down and out, and they had a debilitating injury, and they're living the dream, and they're playing to stay on the big club, and hearing that in his voice. These are the kind of interviews I love, like these players. And then you have the other extreme where this Friday I'm covering the Duck Sharks, as I mentioned, for ESPN Plus. And the good news is I'll get to talk to Erik Karlsson. The bad news is it's like, okay, as soon as he comes out on the ice, you got to be at the bench. You got 2 questions and you just got to go. It's just like 2 questions, boom, out, he's done. See ya. I can't, it can't be like 3, 2 of like basic stuff. So it is what it is. And you just try to work around it and get, whatever. But you're right. It's changed, Larry, for sure.
Larry takes us inside the locker room. You take us on the ice. Now, you are the on-ice reporter. Take us through the different angles you cover, because you've done in between the benches. You're on the ice. You're here. You're there. Take us the different sides, and it's got to be cool for you now with NHL back on ESPN.
Oh yeah, it's definitely cool. I kind of love having the chance to be between the benches and being ice level and commenting on what was going on. And what you have to do is you got to be during COVID and during even the year after COVID. It sucked. They had the big glass, used to have really access to the players. And now you have the big plexiglass on each side of the bench. But still, you have to be, someone told me great advice about being between the benches. You have to be the nosy neighbor. That's what you have to be. That's how you fill your role, because you have to like really look inside their bench and say, okay, what's going on? Who's looking at an iPad? Who's holding their arm? What trainer is doing that? Who's not on the bench? So you have to be a nosy neighbor. Like, it's none of your business, but you have to be a pain in the butt and look. But what I love about being an on-ice reporter is that I get to interview the players after each period and react. I get to interview the coaches on the bench and not make it sound generic. Because as a sports fan, most people hate those stupid interviews, right? But, it's like in and out, and give the time to the coach. Don't do long questions. Questions should be like 8 seconds long tops. Get right to it. And I like that adrenaline rush about it. Like, I have to be in, out, go, do this, that, boom, boom. Last month, I think, I was doing that Kings Wild game. Kevin Fiala won the game with 1 second to go in overtime. And then he came right off the ice, right to me, for the interview. And I was like, I was more excited than him. I was like, oh my God, did you have a buzzer beater like that ever, type of thing? He goes, no, I've never had that. But it was just so cool. So I still get a rush no matter what I do. But I think I really like the on-ice reporter thing, because you get more access to really connect with these players, and for them, to see you at your job and how you're handling it. They don't care if you're in between the benches. You're trying not to get hit by a puck, which, I'm a goalie. So I've come close a few times. It did hit me a couple of times, but it didn't hurt.
I'm curious, like you must hear things that you just can't repeat on the air. Like, you must hear either words exchanged, something exchanged between benches. Does that happen where you're like, all right, this is off the record, but that was quite entertaining?
Yeah, well, I mean, that happens all the time. It happened a couple of times with me, but I'm always been athlete first kind of thing. Like, there's a code. Like, I'm not gonna, I'm gonna say, whoever it was, I don't know, Brendan Lemieux talking to some, saying this to whoever, Matthew Tkachuk, whatever. There's a little conversation going on down here. I can't make out what they're saying, but you can leave it up to your imagination, type of thing, that whole thing. But that's kind of fun. That's part of the whole rush of being ice level. Man, but I'll tell you, when you're ice level, this game is so fast. These guys are so quick. They react. They skate so great. I mean, you really get it's one thing being up on the stands, or as Larry knows, the press box, all this kind of stuff. But when you're ice level, it is exciting. That's the part I love about being between the benches.
Yeah. You know what? The difference between watching a game up top and watching a game at ice level, or just, a couple of rows up.
Yeah.
It is so dramatic. It is amazing how fast the game is.
Yeah.
It is just amazing. And upstairs you're picking everything apart, because again, but that's their job. Their job is to be, they're the best hockey players in the world. They're getting paid an immense amount of money because they're the best hockey players in the world. But their skill is at such a high level at this point that it is It is awe-inspiring sometimes, again, upstairs, you look at it, oh, okay, fine. But when you're down there and you see how quickly they have to make decisions and how fast, the gaps close and they just have no time. And, the great players are somehow able to slow it down. They are able to slow the game down so that they're not rushing when everyone else is. It's almost impossible to convey the degree of difficulty of playing the sport. And, kind of like it is, and I get it, like, when you're watching at home a baseball game, you think you can hit a 97-mile-an-hour fastball. Why not? It's right down the plate. But I remember when I was at spring training a number of years ago, I was in Tampa with the Yankees, and I stayed behind for a B game because Randy Johnson was pitching a couple of innings in a B game, and we could stand, and we were basically near the dugout watching that game. And when Randy Johnson was throwing, it was like, how could somebody stand in there against the Randy Johnson fastball? So, the appreciation of these guys, you take it for granted, but their skills are just remarkable.
Yeah. And think about if you're a goaltender, again, being ice level and seeing what these goalies, how quickly they have to react, especially through traffic. I mean, it's just the game moves so fast and how they have to follow the puck. Can't even find the puck. It moves so fast.
So my last one for you is, why did you become a goalie then?
Yeah, you know what? It's a simple story, Larry. I was a kid with low self-esteem. Back in the day, I wore, really thick glasses. These are just the glasses that you wear when you're older. And so then I got contact lenses, but I was really a shy girl. Like I didn't have a lot of friends. Like I told you, I watched a lot of sports with my dad, fell in love with hockey, and I picked goaltending. I was playing street hockey with the boys. And this is like when I got contacts and everything. And I actually was really good. Like, I used to play tennis. And then, I don't know, I just had some great eye-hand coordination. And I was like, hey, I'm now the center of attention. And I know that sounds crazy, but when you're a shy girl and you have no friends, basically, and you're afraid to talk to anybody, and you're playing hockey, street hockey with the boys, and you're good at goalie, and suddenly I was, well-liked, I was like, okay, I think I can do this. And so I begged my mother. We found out there was a league, ice. I didn't know how to ice skate. And my mother found a league that would accept girls on Long Island. It was Farmingdale, Long Island. It was called Racket and Rink. And I was supposed to practice there.
That's where the Islanders were practicing.
That's right. And that's where I met like Bobby Nystrom and Chico Resch. I played in this league where I played with boys, and I was like one of like 3 girls, not on my team, but they were on different teams. But but I had to play with boys that were like significantly younger. I mean, I was 14 years old, 15. I had to play with 11, 12-year-old boys. But then again, I learned to skate with 40 pounds of goalie equipment on me. It's so funny because when the times when I would go public skating or skating without equipment, it took me a while to adjust. So the goalie thing, because I went from wallflower to center of attention. And actually, I didn't mind risking being the one that not makes the big save. I was just wanting to have the opportunity to be the heroine, right? To make that big stop and get all that spotlight. And it's not a cocky thing. It's not being conceited. It was just a thing where I was good at it. And then it brought me out of my shell. And that's why it really did. And it really realized that I could do anything if I put my mind to it.
Linda Cohn joining us. Last one from me here, Linda. One move to propel the Rangers over the top here. You seem like
I won't even let you finish your sentence. I've wanted Patrick Kane for 3 years. 3 years.
Like you'll walk Kako to the airport, it seems.
He actually, I'm telling you, when I've done Chicago Blackhawks games, I've done like multiple Blackhawks games the last couple of years. He calls me like Miss Ranger. And I go, so when's it going to happen? And I saw him early, like last month, I did a game and he's like, I go, aren't you happy I didn't ask you about the Rangers? And he laughed. Now here's a heartbreak. Here, Ranger fans, here's where I'm talking to you now, and I'll be heartbroken if the Islanders get it. I don't care if the Rangers don't think they can use Patrick Kane. Don't let the Lou Lamoriello and the Islanders get him, because that would be soul crushing, heartbreaking. So that's who I would go for. Just more depth, more offense. Again, I've shared my feelings about some of the players on the team that I don't think they try, but they don't give enough. The results are not there. They just need more offensive depth. I love the backliners, love the defensemen, love that we're getting goals and points from these great defensemen. The Keandre Millers who scored his first the other night, last night. And then, of course, Schneider and all these guys, you know, of course, Adam Fox, greatness. He could have been the captain, by the way, you know, but, and of course, Troubs and all the, I don't worry about the defense at all. And of course, Ryan Lindgren, talk about heart and soul. Guy gives you all every single game. So Patrick Kane, Jake.
All right. Well, you've put it in his ear. You've told him. You said, come to the Rangers. So if he comes, you get all the credit, Linda.
Okay, good.
Follow Linda on Twitter and Instagram at Linda Cohn. Catch her on ESPN. Catch her on ESPN Plus in the Crease Sports Center, of course. Linda, appreciate you coming on up in the blue seats. Good to catch up with you. Happy holidays.
Oh, anytime. Glad to be here. Larry, good seeing you. And
Same
Jake,
here.
thanks as always.